New tonight, let me tell you that we are in Psalm study, and last week, actually, we got a whole lot of comments from last week. Psalm 24 was an amazing study, just because of the word, not necessarily because of me, but because of the word. And tonight we'll do Psalm 25. Let me remind you that I already did Psalm 26. Remember that little lapse I had in memory? And so that's going to be put on YouTube, but from this one, we're going to go to Psalm 25, and next week will be Psalm 27. So just so you know, Psalm 26 was already done. It will be on YouTube. So let's go to in the news. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in New World Order. Is it Islamophobic to deny that Palestine exists? Now, I'm not going to give you a lot of articles tonight, but there are some of them that are pretty heady, so I'm going to read quite a bit of them. I'll put in a little bit more. I've read them all, and I can kind of give you a summation, but I really want you to hear the words tonight. Despite repeated comments in which she reportedly repeated hateful anti-Semitic tropes, Representative Ilhan Omar, Democrat from Minnesota, escaped even the mildest slap on the wrist from her congressional colleagues. You all remember when that happened. But it turns out that Kelman Yeager won't get off so easy. He's also a Democrat. Now, listen to this. Yeager, a member of the New York City Council, who represents a heavily Jewish district, is in trouble for offending New York's Arab and Palestinian community with remarks that some have interpreted as Islamophobic. But unlike Omar, around whom many Democrats circled the wagons in order to prevent offended Jews and pro-Israel members of Congress from forcing her off the House Foreign Relations Committee, which is a travesty that she's even on that, by the way, it looks as if members of his own party are abandoning the Brooklyn Democrat. What did Yeager do? He denied the existence of a country named Palestine. And by the way, there is no country named Palestine. Just so you understand, there is no country. There's no language that's Palestinian, and I'll tell you just a little bit later. And this is what he said, and he said it very accurately, as a matter of fact. That was enough to draw the opposition of fellow Democrat City Council Speaker Corey Johnson and Mayor Bill de Blasio. The two asserted that if Yeager didn't retract his comments, he should be booted off the New York legislative body committees on immigration. Yeager has refused to back down, with the kerfuffle leading to a noisy standoff outside his Brooklyn office, where demonstrators and counter-demonstrators exchanged insults. Late on Monday, the council's leaders made good on their threat and removed Yeager from the committee. But as Linda Sarsour, a notorious anti-Semitic Palestinian-American activist and leader of the resistance to U.S. President Donald Trump, who has been drawn into this fight, observed, it may mark the first time an American politician will be made to suffer for having offended Palestinians and those opposed to Israel's existence. Yeager's defense rested in both context and geographical fact. His initial comment came in response on Twitter to the idea that Ahmed Tibi, one of the leaders of an Israeli Arab political party, would become prime minister of an Israeli-Palestinian state that would theoretically replace Israel. He said it proved, quote, the ultimate goal of the so-called Palestinians is the destruction of the Jewish state and its people. He then responded to criticism of that tweet with another that escalated the argument. Quote, Palestine does not exist. There, I said it again. Also, Congresswoman Omar is an anti-Semite, said that too. And he's absolutely right. Palestine doesn't exist. I've told you over and over again, and hopefully I can tell you again, that Palestine was really a name given to the area of Israel that was defeated by the Romans in 70 AD. They called that landmass Palestine, a slap in the face to the Jews that were living there, based on the fact that they're trying to talk about the Philistines, which have nothing to do with the Palestinians. And also, they named Jerusalem Ayatollah Capitolini. Ayatollah Capitolini never stuck. Palestine did. The people that were living there in that area were Jews. They were the first Palestinians. And so it's really a misnomer when you see it. So he then responds to criticisms, and then it says, is this analogous to Omar's talk of Jews hypnotizing the world, being disloyal Americans, and buying Congress to support Israel? The Palestinian Americans and some of their supporters assert that any denial of their existence as a people, or that they consider their homeland is called Palestine, is hateful and delegitimizing. By the way, they're not called Palestinians. They're calling themselves Palestinians. They are not Palestinians. They were Arabs, and they're still Arabs. So it says this, prior to 1948 and the birth of Israel, the only group that answered to the name Palestinians were Jewish residents of the British Mandate for Palestine. Non-Jews who lived there considered themselves Arabs, not Palestinians. Again, there's no such group. The name is nowhere mentioned in history that has anything to do with Arabs at all. It was Palestinians were actually Jews from the Balfour Declaration. So, let me give you another one. The duplicitous double standard of the UN towards Israel. There are 194 nations in the world, 194, and 193 acquired their territory through the use of military force. That is how borders have traditionally been drawn. Most of these campaigns were offensive. And by the way, let me remind you, the 13 original colonies were owned by England. How do we acquire the United States? England came to fight us, and we won, and we took the colonies. Could you imagine England today saying, give us back the colonies? This is exactly what happens with the Golan. Israel was attacked on all fronts, 22 aggressive Arab nations in 1967. They took back the Golan, they took back the Sinai, they took back the Gaza Strip. And now we see that they're the only nation on the planet that's required or asked to by the UN body to give that land back. It's the only one. Listen to what it says. This article writer said, I've asked many military experts, historians, and scholars about this. And they have to a person told me that there is only one nation in the world who gained territory through the use of force that has been sued time and again to relinquish that territory. You guessed it, it's the state of Israel. What is so profoundly outrageous about this is that Israel acquired lands in defense and defensive wars. It's not as though Israel is a colonial state that set out to acquire the land to enrich itself. Israel acquired the Golan Heights in an act of self-defense when they had been attacked on all sides in the 1967 war, and managed to successfully retain this land in the 1973 war. Syria is a failed state. We have seen how the 8-year-old brutal Syrian civil war at the hands of Bashar al-Assad has left at least 500,000 of his own people dead, and 5.6 million refugees, along with 6.8 million internally displaced persons. According to a recent article and commentary by the legal scholar Vivian Berkovi, since World War II, the accepted understanding of international law that involves territorial loss during conflict is quite straightforward. The attacking nation may not retain permanently land acquired as a result of armed conflict. For those who are objecting to this move, kindly inform us of whom precisely Israel is supposed to negotiate with. Who would they give the land back to? Let's look at the players. In Syria, it's Bashar al-Assad and the rump state of Syria, or maybe Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of the ISIS in the Levant. Osama Soleimani and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps that works hand in glove with Bashar al-Assad. How about Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, and who now has approximately several thousand troops in Syria? The reality on the ground is that the 400 square miles of the Golan Heights is a demarcation line of a Hobbesian state of war, of man against man, in relatively tranquil democratic area. I've been there many times. The Golan Heights is the highest elevation in Israel to the north. Anybody who secures that spot can rain down terror on either side, Syria or on Israel. Israel took that area back. And basically, when they took it back, it was an amazing thing. When I take people to Israel, I tell them to get this little book called Armed Man in Damascus. There was a man by the name of Eli Cohen. Eli Cohen was a Jew. He was in the civil service, so his family thought, and his wife, but he was actually a spy. He worked his way all the way up to the Syrian government and almost became the president of Syria in 1965. What he did was he was commanding the troops of Syria. He's a Jew. They don't know it. He has a ham radio. He's going back and forth to Israel telling the plans. The Golan was riddled with all kinds of bunkers that the Syrians were encapsulated in, and they were firing at will down on the Sea of Galilee and Tiberias and everyone that was there. Israel could do nothing about it because they were hidden. So he convinced, it was a very hot summer, he convinced the Syrian government that they should plant eucalyptus trees over all the bunkers where the Syrian men were dying of heat in these bunkers ready to bomb Israel, ready to fire on Israel. Then he ham radio back to Israel and the generals that were there and said, by the way, eucalyptus trees are fast growing. He said, as soon as you see eucalyptus trees, bomb as soon as you see eucalyptus trees. They literally took out every Syrian troop on the Golan Heights. And so there's a lot of things that God has done to give them and procure that land. And basically, the Israeli intelligence and military officials up there are the eyes and ears for vital intelligence and military information that they willingly share with the United States. So when President Trump gave it back, or he actually condoned Israel's occupation of it, it caused a furor around the world. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but let me just give you the rest of this story. This is why it's no less than infuriating when 14 nations of the UN Security Council met on Wednesday at the request of Syria to condemn America's recognition of Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Would any of these distinguished representatives ever subject their own citizens of their nations to the uncertainty of trading land for peace? If they had such wolves banging at their gates, and by the way, the 14 nations that met, every single one of their nations acquired some of their land through wars. And so it's pretty much a hypocrisy and a double standard. So as we're continuing to talk about that, let me give you this one. This is Gaza time bomb keeps ticking. And we're talking about Gaza, and we're talking about really an end-time type of prophecy. But let me tell you about the Gaza time bomb. Few events better illustrate the need for Israeli Defense Forces' policy of zero tolerance. And I'm going to give it to you right over here. Zero tolerance to attempted Palestinian intrusions from Gaza than the capture earlier this month of 2 armed men near Kibbutz Erez, located just north of the Gaza Strip. On March 8th, IDF soldiers responded to a border intrusion alert from Gaza, caught the two suspects who were armed with grenades and knives. They were just a few minutes away from where the kibbutz Eretz, where children were playing soccer in the fields. The armed suspects turned out to be operatives affiliated to the Iranian-backed Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group, which has amassed a rocket arsenal in Gaza that's bigger than that of Hamas. Total arsenal surpasses 20,000 projectiles. The armed intruders arrived on a Friday when Hamas organized weekly mass border riots. During these events, Hamas sends thousands of people towards the border with Israel. Small teams of armed terrorists then try to use the civilian rioters as human shields, approaching the border fence to attempt intrusions. On Saturday, during Land Day, Hamas organized some 40,000 Palestinians and sent them to the border. But this time, it made a bigger effort than usual to prevent any of them from approaching the fence. The reason for the uncharacteristic caution? Hamas is waiting to see whether Israel accepts some of its demands. This caution has not extended to rocket strikes on southern Israel, which continues into civilian areas. For the past year, Hamas has employed weekly protests called the March of Return as an extortion technique to pressure Israel into allowing more funds and infrastructure projects into Gaza. So they're trying to use extortion to get Israel to pay money, and they're saying, we won't bomb you if you give us more money. Israel, for its part, wants to assist Gazan civilians who are essentially being held hostage by the regime, Hamas. But it also is keen to avoid a situation in which Hamas exploits any new any new agreement to build up its military ring, rocket arsenal, and tunnel network. Yet Hamas remains deterred by the idea of an all-out war. They don't want it with Israel. Instead, seeks a way to save Gaza from implosion, to save its regime from a popular revolt, and to do this without going to war. It has found the halfway tactic of controlled escalations to do this. A year ago, Hamas quickly seized the idea of return marches. It was keen to take control of movement that otherwise could have turned into a threat against its own rule and its use to extort Israel. Hamas's total control of these weekly protests is unmissable and comes in the form of grenade attacks, i.e. deep border attacks, and the cynical use of miners to plant bombs at the border fence. Using children as a military tool is just one of many Hamas's tricks. Can you imagine what the UN and the world would say if Israel did these things? The Gaza regime also sends women to roll tires to the border fence and then sends children to set them on fire, creating a smoke screen designed to allow Gazan youth to approach the border fence and cut it open. Hamas has instructed riders to rush through such openings in the border fence so it can inject small groups of operatives armed with grenades, knives, and handguns. Their mission: head to nearby Israeli villages located just a few hundred meters from the border. Within 3 minutes, these terror squads can be at the entrances of Israeli villages. Some 60,000 Israelis live in the vicinity of the Gaza Strip, where they engage in agriculture and live out their lives, as the IDF works day and night to defend their safety. Instead of working together with Gazans on joint agricultural initiatives, southern Israelis must face rockets, mortars, tunnels, arson, and balloons and kites that carry explosive devices over the border, which the IDF rushes to neutralize before children pick them up. None of these events have so far changed Hamas's basic problem. It risks losing control of Gaza, and it's going to lose control of Gaza, as civilians find the courage to publicly condemn its failings and have started protesting the low quality of living. Hamas makes $500 million a year just from taxes it imposes on goods entering Gaza from Egypt. But most of that money goes to the military wing, 97%, not to Gaza's people. Likewise, Iran's annual assistance package goes to the military wing of Hamas also. Hamas may well be armed, but it remains isolated, exposed to Egyptian pressure. Now the Egyptians are pressuring them. And it's in a state of unending conflict with its chief internal rival, Fatah. Its rule in Gaza is also tested by other armed factions, chief among them, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which can employ the Israeli Air Force to strike Hamas by launching rockets on their own initiative. So they live there and they're against Hamas. So all they do is have to throw a rocket to Israel. Israel will respond back to Hamas, who are the leaders. So they're using Israel actually to wipe out Hamas. So it's unclear how long Hamas can remain and rely on current tactics. The less stable situation for Hamas, the more it will seek to divert aggression outwards in Israel's direction, and the chances for armed conflict will increase. Let me give you a little prophecy that they're going to go to a small, limited war. Israel's wars are always a couple days. Israel's only going to take so much of it, and Israel's going to have to go in and wipe out Hamas. And it's going to happen. It can happen. We don't get it on our nightly news, unfortunately, but it can happen very, very soon. Now, people ask me all the time, well, aren't you afraid about going to Israel? Listen, it happens in a very quick timetable and in a very small area. It's never affected anything where the tours are or anything. Gaza is remote. No tours go anywhere near there. There's no biblical sites near it other than Gaza itself, which you wouldn't want to go see. And so basically, it's going to happen. It's going to happen soon, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does. Now, let me give you this one. It's pretty interesting. Trump and Cyrus the Great. Listen to this. Trump isn't Cyrus. yet. Following President Trump's proclamation recognizing Israeli sovereignty of the Golan Heights on Monday, let me stop here and just inject something. I'm not crazy about President Trump's personality. I'm just going to tell you that. Just because he's doing that, listen, let me go a little further. I'm not crazy of his tweets. Now you may say yes, you may say, I'm not really crazy of his lifestyle. But I am definitely convinced that God has him as our president. So I want you to understand the difference there. This man is being used like no other president ever. And basically we're watching all of hell break loose against him because of that. I'm not sure how he's even going through it, to be honest with you. No one should endure all that barrage that's coming at him. But he's staying the course and he's doing what he's called to do. He's done more as an American president than most of the American presidents that have ever lived in your lifetime together. And so it's an amazing thing what he's doing. Again, you don't have to buy his personality. You don't have to buy his tweets. You don't have to buy how he acts. But how he is making policy is unbelievable. And I'm totally behind that. Somebody say amen to that so you understand it. So let me tell you this. Let me show you this and this article and go further. Prime Minister Netanyahu compared the American leader to Cyrus the Great. Prime Minister Netanyahu, during the signing ceremony at the White House, Prime Minister Netanyahu established the historical significance of the Golan decision. Quote, in the long sweep of Jewish history, declared the Prime Minister, there have been a handful of proclamations by non-Jewish leaders on behalf of our people and our land. Cyrus the Great Persian King, Lord Balfour, that's from Britain, President Harry S. Truman, and President Donald J. Trump. This was not the first comparison of a U.S. president to the Persian King. President Truman was the first when he actually compared himself to Cyrus. Introduced at a dinner by his friend Eddie Jacobson as the man who helped create the State of Israel, and he did. Truman cried, "What do you mean, helped create? I am Cyrus, I am Cyrus." Not sure about that statement, but that's interesting. Cyrus the Great, who lived 600 to 530 BC, was the founder of the Persian Empire, who expanded his kingdom into the largest empire the world has yet seen during his 30-year reign. From a historical perspective, he's known for his many achievements, but the Bible remembers him fondly for a very specific reason. Cyrus was the Persian king who defeated the Babylonians after the destruction of the first temple in 586 BC. According to the Bible, one of his first acts was to reverse the damage caused by the Babylonians. In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, when the world of Hashem, God spoken by Joshua, was fulfilled, Hashem roused the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia to issue a proclamation throughout its realm by word of mouth and in the writing as follows. Thus saith the king of Persia, from Ezra 1:1-3. God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and has charged me with building him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Any one of you and all of his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, that is in Judah, and build the house of God in Israel, the God that is in Jerusalem. That's Ezra. The proclamation, known as the Edict of Cyrus, which is repeated in 2 Chronicles, that's chapter 36 by the way, has been corroborated by archaeology in the discovery of the Silas cylinder 150 years ago. In March of 1879, an ancient clay cylinder from the 6th century BC was found in Iraq with text confirming and affirming the Bible account. The fascinating Cyrus cylinder is one of the great artifacts of biblical archaeology and now rests in the British Museum. Thanks to King Cyrus, tens of thousands of Jews returned to the land of Israel, officially ending the Babylonian captivity, exactly as promised 70 years earlier by the prophet Jeremiah. The biblical account is very specific, as the Edict of Cyrus calls explicitly for the building of the house of God in Jerusalem. And again, I'm reading a lot because I want you to get the whole gist of it. The house referred to by King Cyrus is the house of prayer for all nations that stood for nearly 1,000 years on the Temple Mount. Cyrus didn't simply allow the Jews to return to their ancient homeland. He calls upon them to rebuild their temple and worship their God freely. Today, despite the millions of Jews who have returned to Israel, thanks to the proclamations of Lord Balfour and President Truman, there is one heartbreaking vestige of our ancient captivity. They don't have a temple. I've showed you this before. This is a coin that is issued by the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount faithful. It has Donald Trump and Cyrus the Great on the front of it. On the back of it has the third temple. So what they're saying is this. They're saying Donald Trump has done so much so far, they wouldn't be surprised if he's the one that gave an okay for a third temple. Now, I'm going to just tell you a couple things. People will write to me and say, well, a third temple, it's going to be the Antichrist. The third temple is not going to be the Antichrist. Third temple is going to be built for Jewish sacrifice. The Antichrist is going to defile it, and Jesus will come and cleanse it and sit on David's throne in that temple. One of the things I was telling yesterday, I started my Isaiah study on my Wednesday night study. I was talking about Isaiah. He prophesied, he was royal blood, and he prophesied to 4 kings of Judah. And as he prophesied right before the Babylonian captivity, he had access to these kings. His message was very, very negative. It was all negative about the Babylonian captivity that was coming. But what Isaiah did is he talked about the restoration and he talked about Messiah. Isaiah is somebody that was in the king's court, and he was giving, obviously, these kings some information. As the kings went, so went the kingdom. Three of the four kings became godly kings, probably because they couldn't shut Isaiah up and they couldn't get him out because he was royal blood. I would not doubt it for one single second that President Trump has someone in his cabinet or someone speaking to him in spiritual terms. He is doing things that's specifically biblical. There is someone like an Isaiah around him. I don't know who they are. We may never know who they are. But he's doing something they're doing something there that's influencing him in a biblical way. And so it's really amazing to me because as soon as you think that the opposition is doing something and is underhanding something, God always has his secret people somewhere. Somebody say amen to that. So Cyrus the Great and President Trump. Let me give you a little bit more. So President Trump has started the ball rolling. You know, he made Jerusalem the capital of Israel. First president ever to do so. All of them passed the buck down the line for almost 60 years. And now we're seeing the ripples happen. Romania is going to move its embassy to Jerusalem. Now, that may not seem a lot to you, but it's a crack in the EU. Listen to this. Romania will move its embassy to Jerusalem, its prime minister has said, shattering the EU's line on the Arab-Israeli conflict, while the country holds the EU rotating presidency. Quote, I am pleased to announce today to the APAC audience that I, as Prime Minister of Romania, and the government that I run, will move our embassy to Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. Romanian Prime Minister Violeta Dancila with EU Council President Donald Tusk. She said it with him. Her announcement broke the joint EU and UN line that Israeli-occupied Jerusalem ought to be shared by Israel and Palestine in a future two-state solution. You realize what she did? She went totally against the EU, which she's part of. She went totally against the UN. It's the first nation ever in the EU to do that. And she said, we're moving our embassy. We don't care what you say, that you think that it should be shared by the Palestinians. We're going to support Israel. And by the way, they're taking America's incentive in doing that. As we continue to go on, let me give you another one that happens with Israel. One of America's most senior politicians has claimed that it's possible Donald Trump was sent by God to save Israel from rival nations. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was responding to a question from the Christian Broadcasting Network on whether the U.S. president was like a modern-day Esther from the Bible. Speaking on the Purim holiday, in which Jews celebrate the biblical rescue of the Jewish people by Queen Esther from the Persians, Pompeo said, quote, as a Christian, I certainly believe that's possible, that he's like an Esther. It was remarkably said, the work that our administration has done to make sure that this democracy is in the Middle East, that this Jewish state remains forever. I'm confident that the Lord is at work here. Maybe Pompeo is the Isaiah that's in that cabinet. I don't know, but something's going on there that is totally biblical. And I'm very, very excited about President Trump's presidency. I had somebody write to me, and I'm not giving a bully pulpit here, and they were saying, how can you back President Trump? How can you back his lifestyle? And I said, you are missing everything. I am not backing a person. I'm backing that policy that person has. There's a big difference. And when you back a policy, it's a policy that's favorable to Israel. I'll back anybody that's that way. Come on, somebody say amen. All right, I'm going quick. You're still with me? All right, go ahead. Well, this one's not so. This is pretty sobering. Tensions rise with Russia as U.S. counter moves around the globe. You've not heard this on any of the network broadcasting medias, and it's really kind of pathetic because it's something that should be told to us. U.S. and Russian tensions are picking up. Several geopolitical moves have been made in the past week, with much of the press mum and quiet on what's happening between the United States and Russia over Venezuela and Ukraine. Last week, the Russians sent troops into Venezuela with a speculatory number of being a total of 200 soldiers that were deployed. Auspiciously, immediately after this, the U.S. Air Force deployed 6 nuclear-capable V-52 bombers to send to Europe to send a message to Russia. That's done by President Trump. He's trying to calm down. You do not want a communist regime to take, a large one, to take over any area in the Western Hemisphere. That's what happened to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so you don't want Venezuela having rockets from Russia right off of in South America able to strike anywhere in the United States. The U.S. Air Force is carrying out these theater integration and flight training out of London's RAF Fairford Station, which will help prepare airmen to use the base as their forward operating location for bombers in Europe, the Air Force said last week. Training with joint partners, allied nations, and other U.S. Air Force units contributes to our ready and postured forces. Meanwhile, simultaneously, the U.S. Air Force Pacific also launched B-52 bombers from Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, Air Force Times reported. The Kremlin accused the U.S. of escalating tensions by flying B-52 bombers near its border. Russia's defense ministry further claimed to prepare 2 Sukhoi Su-27 fighter jets to intercept the U.S. aircraft before it changed direction. So they never got there. They didn't want to get there. They changed direction. Trump administration National Security Advisor Bolton threatened Russia for sending its troops into Venezuela, stating that any move to expand operations there would be considered a direct threat to international peace. We strongly caution actors external to the Western Hemisphere against deploying military assets to Venezuela or elsewhere in the hemisphere with the intent of establishing expanding military operations, White House National Security Advisor John Bolton said in a statement. We will consider such provocative actions a direct threat to international peace and security in the region. Almost immediately after this, Russia, listen to this, flew its own Tu-154M aircraft over several military installations in California. They flew their aircraft over our military installations in California and Nevada. They flew their aircraft over Edwards Air Force Base and Fort Irwin National Training Center, including Area 51, as part of the Treaty of an Open Skies Agreement. It also came as after U.S. President Trump loose-lipped statement that Russia has got to get out of Venezuela and all options are open. The Russian government response is that U.S. plans for regime change. They're saying, we'll wait them out. We're going to do what we're going to do. We'll wait them out. Moscow's been thwarted since it sent its military, and the U.S. is nervous, Russia said. Other things to note, both Russia and the United States have pulled out of the INF Treaty, which governs the two nations not using nuclear weapons, which means now both nations are saying, we'll use nuclear weapons if we have to. So when we talk about World War III, and we talk about Revelation, listen, there are some things, and by the way, contrary to popular belief, a nuclear weapon will not destroy everybody on the planet. There are limited nuclear weapons, and maybe John saw that in Revelation when he talks about that fervent heat. So it's pretty interesting what's going on. Let me give you a couple other ones now, then I'll sit down, all right? All right, this one's pretty interesting. Anti-Christian bigots continue their war on Chick-fil-A. A second airport has now decided to ban Chick-fil-A because of its anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. First it was the San Antonio airport. Now the Buffalo Niagara International Airport. In reality, the reason for the ban is Chick-fil-A is owned by Bible-believing Christians who donate money to find Christian ministries, and it's that simple. The trouble began in 2012 when Chick-fil-A CEO Dan Cathy affirmed that marriage was a union of a man and a woman. How many believe that? Amen. You're not the only ones in America to believe that. There's a whole lot of Christians in America that believe that. So don't think of all the stuff you hear on the news. There's a whole lot of us that believe that. In his words, he was guilty as charged, he said, for believing and affirming in traditional marriage. The reaction, of course, was swift and severe. How dare he? Bigot, homophobe, hater. America must boycott the horrible place. Read for yourself Cathy's hateful words, but brace yourself for first, these are really wicked. He's being tongue-in-cheek. He said this, we are very much supportive of the family, the biblical definition of the family unit. We are a family-owned business, a family-led business. We're married to our first wives. We give God thanks for that. We know that it might not be popular with everyone, but thank the Lord, we live in a country where we can share our values and operate on biblical principles. What kind of heartless monster could utter such words? People of conscience should never darken the doors of the terrible franchise again, America said. Especially when Cathy said that America was shaking its fist at God and wanting to redefine marriage, banish him. And that's what they're saying. But calls for a boycott, listen to this, resulted in counter calls for a boycott. And this Christian-owned Sunday clothes business continued to succeed. They made 3 to 4 times the amount of profits after the boycott was called against them. Could it be that God is blessing these franchises, which are famous for providing the best customer service in fast food restaurants in the country? And obviously, people like the food, which as far as fast food chains go, may not be quite as unhealthy as some of the others. But the backlash was far from over. Students called for a Chick-fil-A ban on their campuses, even resulting in the resignation of a Christian dean who protested in the ban. New Yorkers were upset, oh, it's too bad, that one of these restaurants could open on their sacred turf. For the record, that boycott didn't go very well either. As CBN reported, New York City boycott bombs as Chick-fil-A booms despite the protest of its Christian family values. You know why? Because there's a whole lot of Christians in America. We're just the silent majority, but listen, when we want to do something, we can do it. I call us the sleeping giant. If we ever woke up, we could turn this whole nation around. And now airports are saying not to no to this very popular restaurant. As one who travels all the time, this article writer says, I can tell you that Chick-fil-A commonly has the longest and fastest moving lines in the airport restaurants. I can tell you the truth also. In response to the San Antonio ban, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton said Thursday he plans to investigate whether the San Antonio City Council violated the First Amendment when it banned Chick-fil-A from participating at a vendor at a city's airport because the restaurant's support for Christian values. And he's right. They stepped all over their First Amendment rights. In Paxton's own words, the city of San Antonio's decision to exclude Chick-fil-A based on the religious beliefs associated with the company and its owners is the opposite of tolerance. It's discriminatory, and not only out of step with Texas values, but inconsistent with the Constitution and Texas laws. As expressed by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, the ban has the stench of religious discrimination against Chick-fil-A, so people are sticking up for them. In fact, what provoked the airport bans was the news that Chick-fil-A gave over $1.6 million to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which writes an online statement of faith that believes marriage is exclusively the union of one man and one woman. Let me check that again. How many believe that marriage is one man and one woman? And believes sexual intimacy should be expressed within that context. In other words, the FCA affirms what the Bible teaches and what all branches of Christianity have affirmed with virtual unanimity until recent decades. The bottom line is that Chick-fil-A is being punished for being Christian, and that's it. The company is not being targeted because it has gone on an anti-gay campaign, which it never has, nor is it being targeted for alleged discriminatory acts against LGBTs, which it has never done. No, this Christian business is being punished for being Christian, as it is. By extension, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Nothing more and nothing less. It's time we face the facts. All right, let me give you one other one on the religion. This is from the Equality Act versus Religious Freedom. I won't read it all. This one I'll just paraphrase. In 2011, the Human Rights Campaign, the HRC, launched a video series that, according to HRC's president, would, quote, help drive the national conversation about same-sex marriage. They wanted to push it, and it did just that. The series featured professional athletes, movie stars, politicians, and civil rights leaders, and look where they are today. They've successfully launched the fact that Americans can embrace same-sex marriage. Well, on Monday, the HRC announced a new video campaign called Americans for the Equality Act. This time, Christians need to be prepared to respond. According to Andrew Walker of the Ethics and Religious Liberties Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, the Equality Act represents the most invasive threat to religious liberty ever proposed in America. And this article writer says, I agree, with the caveat that the Equality Act seems virtually unpassable when it first was conceived all the way back in 1974. In fact, it seemed unpassable in 1984, 1994, 2004, and even 2014. Despite the name, backers of the Equality Act aren't seeking a balanced LGBTQ rights. There's too many letters. As Angel said, it's a winner-take-all situation. It takes the category of gender identity and sexual orientation and elevates them to a protected class in the Civil Rights Amendment. So that means that if somebody comes and wants to come into a church and be hired, if we don't hire them in their LGBT or Q, and we don't hire them, we can be fined and we can be shut down because we're going against civil liberties. Let me tell you something. Sexual orientation and the color of your skin are not the same. Amen. You should never prejudice against somebody for the color of their skin. But if you have no biblical basis for that. You can't say because you're a different color than me, I can't accept you. Obviously, that's unchristian. But we can say we don't practice that here and we don't want a part of our church. That's a religious conviction. How many understand that? This is coming up for a vote again. It's going to pass Congress. It's going to fail in the Senate. But what this says is that be careful, because if we change a few seats in that Senate, this is going to become law. And it's going to make it very, very difficult for any Christian organization to stand up for their religious values. The Equality Act is a horrible thing that's coming. Let me give you a couple last things. I say one, but you know me with one. Midwest. So maybe God's judging us. And here's the hard part about judgment. And I'm sure people are going to write to me. Judgment hurts people. And we have a pathos for people that are hurt. We have a compassion for them. But on the same hand, a judgment is because you can't fly in the face of God without any type of repercussion. You just can't do it. God will wait as long as He can. He'll wear you out waiting. He'll wear you out. He'll wait until He has to do judgment. But God's going to judge. I mean, He has to, or He's not God. Listen, Midwest apocalypse, and we're not hearing any of this in the news either. 1 million acres of U.S. farmland are devastated by floods. Now, I feel for the farmers, but I think America should wake up. We've never seen anything like this before. According to satellite data that was just released by Reuters, at least 1 million acres of U.S. farmland were covered by waters for at least 7 days this month. It's an agricultural disaster without equal in modern American history. This is the biggest news story of 2019 so far, and people want to know what's going on, but no one is telling us. As many as 1 million calves were lost in Nevada. Beef prices in the U.S. are to escalate dramatically in the coming months. It's already been shared on social media more than 245,000 times. Farming communities all over the central part of the nation now look like war zones. As a result of all this flooding, the media elites on the east and west coast don't want to write about it. And with more flooding on the way for the next 2 months, the crisis will need to get worse. And how's it going to get worse? Well, because basically they won't be able to plant either. In Iowa, 474,000 acres were covered by floodwaters for at least 7 days. Overall, the recent flooding caused at least $3 billion in economic damage, according to authorities, but many believe that the final number will be far higher. Thousands upon thousands of farms have been completely destroyed, and thousands upon thousands of farmers will not plant any crops at all this year. It's pretty sad when you think about that. All right, let me give you ready for some good news? How many are ready for some good news? All right, look at this and listen to this. And listen, God has his way. Earlier this month, residents of Lee County, Alabama had their lives turned upside down when they were hit by an EF4 tornado with winds of around 170 miles an hour. At least 23 people were killed, some of them children. As a result, March 3rd was labeled the deadliest day of tornadoes in the state in almost 6 years. It's likely why images of prayer closets that have survived through it all, shared by a chaplain, have gone viral as the community needed a vision of hope. This is a grandmother's prayer chapel. Now listen, it's the only thing that survived. Chaplain Jason Smith was in the area with the Billy Graham Rapid Response Team after the storm when he saw a house torn apart. But there was one room of the structure that remained standing. It goes on to say this: I just left a family who survived a tornado in the house, and the only left standing is this closet. It's the grandmother's prayer closet. And the whole family survived, Smith shared on Facebook. He says, my God is awesome. For the uninitiated, some Christians take the word of the Bible quite literally and will set aside a room or a closet that is dedicated to prayer, as per Matthew 6:5-6. The verse reads, and when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. They love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close your door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you openly. This lady's prayer closet survived. So I thought that was really kind of neat. And then I got something else handed to me tonight. There's another lady who was believing in God, and a tornado was coming to her house. And she went, by her own admission, she anointed every single room, every door of every room of her house. And drones took this picture after the F4 tornado came through. Don't tell me that God doesn't exist. That's in the news for tonight. I'm going to ask the ushers as they come forward.